The gradual fall-off of Darryl has been a disappointment to see in this game, as it seems the dev team has all but forgotten about our favorite rolling captain, with all of his recent changes being lackluster compared to his fellow tanks. When looking back over the last 2 years, we see he gained a small buff to his gadget's damage and a projectile speed increase on his main attack. But both of these changes ultimately did very little to help with his viability, as it seems all the major buffs were given to the other low-rarity tanks. This stagnation of Darryl's power coupled with the gradual power creep in the game, due to the game releasing better and better brawlers and providing more buffs than nerfs with every update, made Darryl go from the go to all-around brawler to barely usable in any competitive state. This has also resulted in his pick rates falling to the bottom 20 in the entire game. When he used to be one of the top 15 in the game, I feel he definitely deserves some love after all this time, so in this video I will be proposing my ideas on how Darryl can fit back into this meta of Brawl Stars. To start off, let's look at Darryl's base kit and see how it compares to his fellow tanks. First, we see he has really good health for a tank at 10,600 HP, which is coupled with an outstanding damage output of 4,800 damage per ammo, with the only drawback being his relatively short range and dual shot requirements. Finally, his super is pretty standard, allowing him to roll in on enemies and bounce off walls. The damage is pretty minimal but provides a 50% shield while he is rolling. Overall, we see he has pretty decent stats compared to his fellow tanks, being average or above average in most categories. So why does he fall short of his other tanks? Well, the first and most obvious observation is that unlike his fellow low-rarity tanks, he does not yet have a hypercharge. I originally thought that all he needed to be meta again was a pretty decent one. But what we have recently seen is that as more and more brawlers have gotten hypercharges, the hypercharged tanks have started to fall off of the meta. In fact, the two best tanks right now do not even have hypercharges. So instead, I looked at why these tanks perform so much better than the others, and what I found was that it came down to two things: utility and consistency. Buster is probably the best example of what a tank should be in a MOBA. Although he has low DPs himself, he offers a ton of utility to his team. With both a pull and team heal in his gadgets, despite one being way better than the other, he is built around supporting his team. This is further pushed with his super tanking shots for his team and his star power, giving him crowd control immunity and damage reduction. Also, thanks to his trait, he is pretty consistent with getting his super without having to engage with and feed the enemies. Meg follows these principles too, but focuses more on consistency and less on utility. Her presence alone in a match is enough to guarantee value in control-based modes like Hot Zone. Thanks to her small form being able to attack at a long range, she forces opponents to respect her. As if they don't, they have to deal with 7,400 more HP once she transforms. This constant cycling and essentially a built-in second chance at life makes her incredibly difficult to take down, even if her personal damage is limited. This often allows her to take the attention of her opponents and force them back into spawn. And just like any good tank, she also has ways to heal and mitigate damage through her gadgets and star powers. With her alternative star power also helps to shut down aggression on the opposite team. Overall, she is incredibly consistent with a bit of utility in her kit. So even without a hypercharge, these brawlers were able to thrive due to these two factors, and it's not a trait exclusive to them. Throughout the entire history of Brawl Stars, whenever a tank got utility added into their kit, like with Jackie's hypercharge, or consistency added in, like the original tank trait, those brawlers shot up the meta. So I will be applying this philosophy into my Darryl rework. So for the first buff, I would like to give Darryl's super a 50% damage buff. Going back to comparisons, we see that the other tanks with charging supers all got damage buffs to nearly 2,000, while on the other hand, Darryl has remained at a measly 800. This buff to 1,200 will make his super feel more impactful, especially when you manage to pull off a double roll on opponents. It also makes his super deal damage equal to half of one of his shots. Figuring out how interactions changes would work with Darryl is really difficult, so I split the categories into 3 separate sections. Pinpoint range, which is all 10 shells per ammo. Close, which is 8 per ammo. Medium, which is 6 per ammo. Again, this buff is associated with the damage on his roll, so I don't think you would ever be far enough away from opponents to hit less than 6 shells if they got hit by the roll. So the following interactions would be changed with this buff. You can pause to see the full list, but it will be brought up again with a later change. But that is actually the only change I would like to make to Darryl's base kit. So now we will be moving on to the gadget and star power section. This is where a bulk of my changes will be focused. To start off, I will be replacing the recoiling rotator gadget. Even with its recent damage buff, it is still negligible and is mostly only used in heist and to charge Darryl's super faster. So instead, he will have the rolling through gadget. With this gadget, Darryl instantly gains 50% of his super and reloads 1 ammo. Fairly simple in design, but I believe it fits, as we have to keep in mind that Darryl is a brawler that will be a lot of new players' first introduction into gadgets and star powers. As on new accounts, either he or Penny is given and almost maxed out for free. For his other gadget, Tar Barrel, I feel it is also incredibly gimmicky in that you only see value when you are already close to opponents. But to keep this idea of semi-guaranteeing takedowns on opponents that are close in his kit, I will be replacing Tar Barrel with the bulletproof gadget. After activating this gadget, Darryl will take 30% less damage from all attacks for the next 3 seconds, and instead that damage will be reflected back at the opponent. The visual effect will be the same as Surge's and Nani gadgets, but it would stay the entire 3 seconds. The reflected damage is most similar to Buster's super, but instead of being fixed damage, it will always be half of the original damage. But just like Buster's super reflections, the projectiles can be dodged. Both of these gadget changes approach the previously discussed focus of adding consistency and utility into his kit. Rolling through focuses on consistency as it gives him a way into the fight faster. It also gives Darryl a guaranteed way back into the brawl in case of a wasted super. On the other hand, bulletproof gives Darryl some utility against longer-ranged opponents, while also helping make his super even more deadly, as activating this gadget right next to an opponent means they would be receiving back half the damage they deal. Moving on to his star powers, I would actually like to keep Steel Hoops the same, but with a minor buff. This buff will take it from a 25% shield for 2 seconds to a 30% shield for 3 seconds. This is to make it be more in line with his new gadget, so his kit is more straightforward. For those wondering, this 5% buff is the same as adding about 1,000 more HP to him. Moving on to his other star power, it has gone through a numerous amount of reworks to try and make it viable, and it has almost never been. Even now, the only use cases for it are in modes like Heist, as Darryl tends to already roll in with full ammo. And against teams where he would need the extra ammo, he dies to fast without his shields. So instead, I want to rework it into being instant bonus damage with the Steamroller star power. With this star power, Darryl's super deals an additional 800 damage. This would make his super deal exactly 2,000 damage, which is 80 more than El Primo's and Bull's supers. 800 additional damage might not seem like a big deal, but let's look at the interaction chart again. This is the chart for his super buffed damage to 1,200. So with this star power, these would be the additional changes. Yeah, there is a crazy amount of changes this simple star power would make, but I feel it is definitely needed considering how slow his reload speed is. And the fact it has to compete with a star power then solves his problem of dying too easily after his super. It would be a complete trade-off of survivability for assassin capabilities. But moving on to the next section of this video, I will be conveying my concepts for both a Darryl Mythic Gear and Hypercharge. As I have done many times before, I turned his bad star power into his Mythic Gear. But not his current form of it, but rather a worse version of its original form. The Rolling Reload Mythic Gear has Darryl reload 1 ammo every time he supers. A very situational mythic gear that will only get value in situations where Darryl wants to chain together supers. Most likely in association with his new rolling through gadget. But onto his hypercharge, I struggled at first to make a concrete concept. The idea I heard the most was to make his roll the same as in beta, where it could cross pretty much the entire map. But I feel this would run into the same problem as Miko's hypercharge, where you spend almost the entire time not being able to fight, but rather in your super. So instead I came up with an ability very similar to Chuck's star power in the Plunder's hypercharge. If Darryl rolls over an opponent during his hypercharge, he acts like a true pirate and plunders all their loot. This effectively steals all of their ammo and transfers it to Darryl. I wanted this kind of hypercharge to act very similar to Chords, where you pretty much have a guaranteed takedown once or twice a game if you can land your super. As for the buffs, I actually want to go over something that not a lot of people know about the hypercharge buffs. The speed buffs will always be based off the brawler's movement speed. Normal brawlers get a 26% buff, fast brawlers get a 25% buff, and very fast brawlers get a 24% buff. So for Darryl, he will get a 25% speed boost. As for damage and shield, they always add up to 30% and boost based on what a brawler is best at. Every tank so far has gotten a 25% shield buff and a 5% damage buff. So this will be true for Darryl too. Finally, for the best builds, I feel there are three main ones that Darryl will have after this rework. Firstly, we have the two pure builds that hyper-focus in on his play styles. First is the tank build that has a large amount of damage mitigation in exchange for low damage output. With both the Steel Hoops star power and bulletproof gadget, it will be rare to see Darryl taking full damage at all throughout the game. And even then, he will have the health gear to heal back up fast if he ever does get low. On the opposite spectrum, we have his assassin build, which exchanges almost all of his shielding abilities for more damage. With the rolling through gadget, Darryl can quickly pick up one takedown and then roll out of trouble in bad situations. Or when paired with the rolling reload, mythic gear can cycle through supers and ammo to chain takedowns together, which gives his overall kit a bit of a team wipe potential that we have seen with other tank counterparts. Also, just the pairing of more supers, with the added bonus super damage from the Steamroller star power, makes Darryl a brawler you always have to respect, even at longer ranges. But moving on to his final build that I personally think might be the best is his consistency build. Even though he will be more vulnerable at longer ranges and his super won't be as deadly. This build gives Darryl a constant way back into the battle with his gadget, and the guarantee that he will be able to survive once he does use his super. With this build, he will be played a lot more similarly to brawlers like Max and Sam, where they aren't there for full team wipes, but rather to just give your team a constant source of aggression in the match. But that is all I have for concepts. To recap, my goal with this rework was to give Darryl consistency and utility like the best tanks, and give him a new niche since his original one of being a brawler to could get super automatically isn't unique or good enough anymore. The first ones is one he would share with his fellow tank Hank, which is being a tanky brawler with constant sources of damage reduction, with his super, gadget, star power, and kinda his hypercharge, all providing ways for him to shield or reduce the ways he takes damage. As for his other niche, it would be a semi-new one in the game, as other brawlers have abilities related to ammo but not to the degree that he would. This niche would be ammo control, as he would have a gadget and mythic gear related to him gaining ammo, and a hypercharge related to him taking away opponents' ammo. I really wanted to add these two into his kit, as we see tanks in other MOBAs finding success due to their large amounts of crowd control abilities, hindering abilities, and damage reduction. With these changes, we see almost every part of his kit plays into that net, and the only parts that don't are made that way, so they are simplistic enough for newer players to understand. As again, we need to understand, this game is marketed towards a younger audience, and Darryl is going to be a lot of those players' first brawler to get gadgets, gear, star power, and hypercharges on, but that is pretty much it for this video. Let me know what you guys think about my changes for Darryl. Were they too much or still not enough? and let me know in the comments what brawlers I should put on the next poll for rework concepts. Thank you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed it, subscribe to catch more concepts similar to this.